in the marketplace, and I hope that Republicans and Democrats will join in with us, try to make this bill better if they'd like to do that, but certainly move us in a direction of doing something that is thoughtful and will move us along towards the private market in residential finance. Thank you very much. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Arizona.
Thank you, and I thank my colleague from Tennessee who, as he knows, we, on the, quote, Dodd-Frank bill, had an amendment to do away with Fannie and Freddie over a 5-year period. I think it's obvious that the senator from Tennessee has done a very lot of work, homework, and in-depth examination of this issue. But I think the senator from Tennessee would agree that what went on with Fannie and Freddie is really one of the worst crimes inflicted on the American people all during the 90s and well into 2000, which was a major contributor to the housing collapse, which then triggered the financial collapse, which we still haven't recovered from. I wonder if the senator from Tennessee would like to elaborate on that.
Well, I don't think there's any question, and I know the senator from Arizona, Mr. President, has been a reformer all of his life. And what we find in this body is you end up having a corporate welfare system built around many of the things that we do here. And as much as I hate to say it, both sides of the aisle through time empower this organization to be what it is. We've built an industry in our country around ensuring that the status quo stays in place. It's unfortunate. And as the senator from Arizona knows as well or better than anybody in this body, the taxpayers are bearing the brunt of this. And so, to me, it's way past time for us to deal with this. I know that many people say, well, in the height of a housing crisis, this is not the time. But the fact is, the way this bill is crafted, and it sounds like the senator from Arizona's amendment, I remember supporting that strongly, again, would have phased out Fannie and Freddie over a period of time. I really do think that we've gone to tremendous extremes to phase this out in a way that makes sense and really allow the private sector to come back. If you really think about the type of finance that takes place in this country around all types of complexities, there is no reason, as long as we create the proper structure for the TBA market, for the private market to function, there's no reason that the private sector cannot do this on its own. And it's really amazing when you think about what's happening with low interest rates. Most homeowners in our country, what they do is they look at the payment they're going to make. And so when you have artificially low rates, what happens? The price of housing actually goes up. And so we end up in a situation where we have this bubble and prices drop tremendously. What happens? The taxpayer ends up bearing the brunt of it. I could not agree more. And, you know, the senator has always taken on tough issues, and maybe I'm responding longer than he wants me to. This is one of those issues where I know that many people back home, candidly, there's a whole industry that is built around this, and I know a lot of times people don't want to take on something like, don't want to change something like that because they know it's tough back home. I'm just glad the senator from Arizona has championed this issue the way that he has. As you mentioned, we've done a lot of work on it also. We think this is a sensible bill that will allow our country to get back where it needs to be. And I know that the Americans that you so well represent, who care so deeply about these transgressions on our citizens, I know that they will support this if we'll just allow this type of legislation to come to the floor and be voted on.
And I think the senator from Tennessee would agree, and I want to get back to the jobs bill, but I think the senator from Tennessee would agree. As long as Fannie and Freddie are in existence and behave in a manner and have the opportunity to behave in a manner that they did in the past, we risk another housing bubble followed by a housing collapse. And that's why I think the senator's proposal is something that deserves our attention and that of the country, so we don't have a repetition of the pain that people in Tennessee and Arizona are experiencing today. Nearly half the homes in my home state of Arizona are, quote, underwater. They are worth less than their mortgage payments. As long as that's the case, it's going to be very difficult to see a way for a strong economic recovery to take place. And I think that phasing Fannie and Freddie out is probably one of the key elements in bringing about not only beneficial change, but prevention and a number of other things have to happen too, but to prevent the kind of catastrophe that was visited on us in 2008.
You know, what happens, it's interesting, when you have a bubble that's taking place, a lot of times there's the private sector becomes very concerned that a bubble is developing, and they begin to slow the process down. They begin to see that, wait a minute, there's a lot of risk here. It's getting pretty frothy. Housing prices in Arizona and California and other places are getting awfully high. Maybe we should be cutting back. But as long as there's a government entity on the other side of that that's going to take all the risk and they can dump it off to them, all it is a machine. And the more they do, the more money they make. And that's what's missing in this current formula, is there's no gauge there to slow the process down when the bubble's becoming overheated. And that's one of the huge contributing factors that I know you've talked about a great deal to what we just saw. And candidly, the reason that you're offering this jobs bill today, the reason you're offering it is we've been through such a financial crisis, and it's brought our country to its knees. On top of that, we've had tremendous amounts of regulation that have enhanced the slowdown even more. But the fact is, I would say to the senator from Arizona, you might not be offering this piece of legislation that you've done such a great job leading on today had it not been for this bubble that was created. You might not even be here today. We might be talking about a totally different subject on the Senate floor. So I thank you for your leadership and for your time, and I yield the floor.
Well, I thank the senator from Tennessee, and he also is one who's been more than willing to take on the tough challenges and issues that we face with a commitment to a bipartisanship that I think we all need. I thank the senator from Tennessee. Mr. President, I'd like to inform my colleagues that I have a lot to say about this jobs bill, and so and there is no unanimous consent agreement. I believe that this is of transcendent importance. I see the senator from Minnesota here. I apologize ahead of time, but we've only got until tomorrow morning to address this issue. This is a compelling issue for this nation, and I intend to talk for a fairly extended period of time on this issue. So, for the benefit of my colleagues, this amendment is identical to the Jobs Through Growth Act, which was introduced on October 17th. And I'm pleased by joining most of my Republican colleagues, and I'd like to highlight the hard work done by my colleague, Senator Paul and Portman, in putting this legislation together. In fact, I'd like to thank all of the senators who, and some of them bipartisan, that we put this jobs bill together. It requires a lot of discussion. It's issues of transcendent importance. I don't have to tell any American how difficult our economic times are, how slow the recovery has been, if at all, the risk of further recession, and it's time we did something different. And I would point out to my colleagues that for 2 years, the other party had control of this body and had control of the House of Representatives for 2 years until the 2010 elections. During that period of time, we passed stimulus bill, we passed health care reform, we passed other big spending bills, all on the premise that America's economy would recover. It didn't. In fact, by any measurement, things are far worse than they were in January of 2009. So, as the President has a jobs bill and the Majority Leader has put forth legislation as part of that jobs bill, we Republicans have a jobs bill. And I know that my friends on the other side of the Capitol also agree wholeheartedly with the majority of what we are proposing today. The difference between our plan and theirs is that we want to create jobs through growth, and they want to create jobs through government spending, through spending and borrowing and taxing. That doesn't work. What they have proposed amounts to nothing more than another stimulus bill, and we saw that movie before. It added to our debt and our deficit, and we lost jobs. Today, my colleagues and I are putting forth a plan to create jobs through sound policies. Economic growth is a fundamental part of long-term sustainable job creation, and that's what our plan offers the American people. I'd like to quote from an article in Forbes magazine by Peter Ferrara that said, "The GOP jobs plan versus Obama's." Senate Republicans have taken the lead in proposing a jobs plan alternative to President Obama's in the form of the Jobs Through Growth Act, led by Senators McCain, Rand Paul of Kentucky, Rob Portman, Ohio. Republicans are remarkably unified behind these economics and jobs growth ideas, with House Republicans having already long supported or even passed several components of that plan. The 28 components of their program add up to exciting prospects for finally sparking the long overdue economic recovery based on proven economic logic and proven experience concerning what works in the real world. Most important are the proposals for both corporate and individual tax reform, closing loopholes in return for reducing the rates. Lower marginal tax rates are the key to providing the necessary incentives for economic growth and prosperity. The marginal tax rate is the rate on the next dollar to be earned from any investment, enterprise, or productive activity. That's the key because it determines how much the producer is allowed to keep out of the next unit of what he or she produces. At a 50% marginal tax rate, the producer can keep only half of any increased production. If that rate is reduced to 25%, the portion the producer can keep grows by 50%, from 1/2 to 3/4. That powerfully increases the incentives for more productive activity, such as savings, investment, starting new businesses, expanding businesses, creating jobs, entrepreneurship, and work. The Republican jobs plan involves closing the special interest loopholes that enable Obama corporate cronies such as General Electric to get away with paying no taxes on $14 billion in corporate profits in return for reducing rates to internationally competitive levels. The United States suffers virtually the highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world, nearly 40%, with a 35% federal rate and another 5% in state corporate rates on average. Even communist China enjoys a 25% corporate rate. In the supposedly mostly socialist European Union, the corporate rate on average is even lower than that. In formerly socialist Canada, the federal corporate rate is 16.5% and going down to 15% next year. The GOP plan would reduce the federal 35% rate to 25%, which is the minimum reduction to restore international competitiveness for American companies. Note that closing loopholes may well raise the average corporate rate on which Democrats and liberals have focused, but it is the marginal tax rate that drives the economy. The GOP jobs plan also includes reducing the top personal individual income rate to 25% as well in return for closing loopholes. The Ryan budget, already passed by the House, would apply that rate to family incomes over $100,000 with a 10% rate applying to incomes below. Those rate reductions would powerfully boost incentives as well, as proven by the dramatic response to the Reagan tax rate reductions in the 1980s. Another component of the plan would eliminate the double taxation of U.S. corporate profits earned abroad by the U.S., quote, worldwide corporate tax code, which adds U.S. taxes on top of the taxes on foreign profits by the host country. The GOP plan calls for adopting the territorial tax code of most our international competitors, which allows profits to be taxed in the country where they are earned and not again when they're brought home. That would unlock for reinvestment in the United States the $1.4 trillion in American corporate profits earned overseas that remain parked there to avoid U.S. double taxation. The GOP jobs plan also recognizes the enormous problem of excessive runaway regulation, which increases the cost of production and so further discourages it. Reducing such costs would consequently increase production, economic growth, and jobs. Step one in the plan to reduce such regulatory burdens is to repeal Obamacare, with its employer mandate adding to the cost of each job by requiring employers to buy more expensive, politically driven health insurance coverage for every employee. That repeal would also reduce future taxes and spending by trillions as well. Further critical relief would result from the GOP jobs plank to repeal Dodd-Frank, which is threatening to squelch credit for businesses and consumers essential to jobs and recovery. The GOP proposal cites research showing that higher costs for financial services resulting from Dodd-Frank would cost the economy nearly 5 million jobs by the year 2015. Another critical area of overregulation is energy. The Republican program would require the Interior Department to move forward in order to free up leasing and development of drilling on public lands onshore. It also eliminates EPA foot-dragging on air permits necessary for offshore drilling and removes EPA authority for unnecessary and burdensome greenhouse gas regulation altogether. This deregulation would ensure a steady supply of low-cost energy essential to booming economic growth. Also in the proposal is the REINS, Regulations from the Executive in Need of Scrutiny Act, which would require congressional approval of all major federal regulations imposing more than $100 million a year in costs. This will reestablish the original congressional check on executive power and democratic accountability for regulatory burdens, so politicians can no longer hide behind faceless bureaucrats to evade public scrutiny for regulatory drains on our freedom and prosperity. This would provide an important solution to excessive regulatory burdens and costs across the board. The Tea Party will favor the plan's plank for a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, which would include necessary tax and spending limitations in the Constitution. Also included is a statutory line-item veto, giving the President more power to cut spending. Reduced government spending, deficits, and debt will reduce the government drain on resources in the private economy needed to create jobs and growth. Finally, the plan even includes a provision for free trade, giving the President renewed fast-track authority to negotiate further trade agreements, eliminating foreign trade barriers, and opening new markets for American goods. For nearly 3 years, President Obama failed to even send to Congress free trade agreements that President Bush had negotiated with South Korea, Colombia, and Panama. But that didn't stop him from political rhetoric blaming Congress for failing to pass them, though Congress did approve them within weeks of Obama finally submitting them. That abusive rhetorical style veers into dishonorable. The GOP program is an exciting, comprehensive strategy for creating another generation-long economic boom. It includes all the components of Reaganomics under congressional control: lower taxes, deregulation, and restrained spending. Besides the economic logic of each of these components discussed above, the experience with Reaganomics proves the plan will work within a year or so of adoption to get the economy booming again. After Reaganomics was adopted in 1981, the economy took off on a 25-year economic boom. In late 1982, what Art Laffer and Steve Moore have rightly called the greatest period of wealth creation in the history of the planet. 20 million new jobs were created in the first 7 years alone, even while an historic inflation was tamed. American economic growth during the 80s was the equivalent of adding the third largest economy in the world, West Germany, to the American economy. By contrast, Obama's jobs plan has recycled brain-dead Keynesian economics, already tried and failed throughout the Obama administration and all around the world for decades before whatever it has been tried. It is about half the size of Obama's nearly $1 trillion 2009 so-called stimulus plan, but contains otherwise the same policies. That 2009 stimulus didn't stimulate anything except runaway government spending, deficits, and debt. Part of the jobs plan is devoted to increase government spending on supposed infrastructure, which only recalls the laughable shovel-ready jobs of Obama's 2009 stimulus. Even Obama has joked about it. Another part is increased spending to bail out spendthrift Democrat states, which Obama calls hiring more teachers, firemen, and cops, a state and local government function, not a federal function. But economic growth is not based on increased government spending, a fallacy which Wall Street Journal senior economics writer Steve Moore has rightly labeled tooth fairy economics. That's because the money for such spending needs to come from somewhere, and so drains the private sector to the extent of such increased government spending, leaving no net effect in any event. What drives economic growth and prosperity is incentives for increased production, as Reaganomics proved. Obama's assault on such incentives is why trillions are sitting on corporate and bank balance sheets, and America is suffering a capital strike and capital flight. The Occupy Wall Street protesters, in threatening property and profits, are just further undermining incentives and contributing to that capital strike and capital flight, which only contributes further to extended and increased unemployment. The other half of the jobs plan includes temporary payroll tax cuts, which are a continuation and expansion of temporary payroll tax cuts Obama convinced the December 2010 lame duck Congress to adopt for this year. But such a temporary tax reductions do not stimulate economic growth and jobs either, as permanent cuts and incentives are necessary for permanent jobs. That was just proved by the failure of this year's temporary payroll tax cut to promote the long overdue recovery. But even worse than the 2009 stimulus is that this current half-stimulus echo is accompanied by Obama's proposal for $1.5 trillion in permanent tax increases. That now includes Obama's support for a 5% millionaire surtax. Those permanent increases only further reduce incentives for production and only contribute further to economic downturn and stagnation under any economic theory. Those tax increases, moreover, would come on top of all of the tax increases Obama has already enacted under current law for 2013, which major media institutions as well as most of the public are unaware. In that year, the Obama tax increases will go into effect and the Bush tax cuts expire, which Obama has refused to renew for the nation's job creators, investors, and more significant small businesses. Under those tax increases, the top tax rates of every major federal tax, except the corporate income tax, already virtually the highest in the industrialized world, with no relief in sight. In sharp contrast to Reaganomics, such Keynesian Obamonomics has already failed miserably to generate a timely recovery consistent with the history of the American economy. Before this last recession, since the Great Depression, recessions in America have lasted an average of 10 months, with the longest previously lasting 16 months. But here we are, 46 months after the last recession started, and still no real economic recovery, with unemployment still at 9%, the longest period of unemployment that high since the Great Depression. Moreover, it cannot be said this is because the recession was so bad, as the experience in America has been the deeper the recession, the stronger the recovery. Based on these historical precedents, we should be nearing the end of the second year of a booming economy right now. In this crisis, for Obama to now just advocate more of the same, with only new, warmed-over rhetoric, is a complete abdication of leadership. Moreover, at this point, outdated economists still peddling hoary Keynesian fallacies should be subject to civil liability for fraud. As I explained in my new publication just out this week from Encounter Books, Obama in the crash of 2013, more likely than recovery is a renewed double-dip recession in 2013, with all the tax rate increases, regulatory burdens building to a crescendo, rising interest rates by then, etc., resulting from Obamonomics. Congressional Republicans should just tell Obama thanks but no thanks on his job plan and pass their own plan proven to work. Then they can insist he explain to the public why he stands in the way. You know, it's a very interesting article there in Forbes, and it's a fairly long one, but I think it puts in adequately the argument for adoption of this legislation, but it also points out one of the results. And I would point out in the Investor's Business Daily, entitled Better in Rwanda, it says, the U.S. has slipped again in world rankings that assess the ease of starting a new business. If we're to bring down our stubbornly high unemployment rate, this trend has to be reversed. According to the World Bank's Doing Business in 2012 report, America is 13 among 133 countries ranked in the starting a business category. In the 2011 report, the U.S. ranked 11th. The year before, it was number 8. In 2009, the U.S. was ranked number 6. It was 4th in 2008 and 3rd in 2007. These are not Republican documents. This isn't a Republican assessment. This is the assessment, according to the World Bank, that doing business in the United States of America has gone from 3rd, as the 3rd best country to do business in 2007, to 13th in 2012. Now, this is ample and adequate proof that we borrowed too much, we've taxed too much, we have issued so many regulations that we have people like Mr. Langone, the founder of Home Depot, who I will quote from in a minute, who says that today he could not start Home Depot all over again. One of the great success stories, by the way, in recent years. In the 2012 ranking, the U.S. trailed such job creators as Macedonia, Georgia, Rwanda, Belarus, Saudi Arabia, Armenia, and Puerto Rico, which are ranked number 6 through number 12. Big companies aren't usually founded as multinational corporations. Most began as small businesses, and it's small businesses which employ more than half of the domestic non-government workforce that generates the bulk of new employment opportunities. Our own research, this is from this article, our own research shows that small businesses create more than 80% of the new jobs in this country. This isn't some fantasy we've cooked up. It's been confirmed in the New York Times by reporter Steve Lohr, who wrote in September, quote, it's an irrefutable conclusion that small businesses are this country's jobs creators. Quote, 2/3 of net new jobs are created by companies with fewer than 500 employees, Lohr wrote, which is the government's definition of a small business. But job creation is more than a function of size. Lohr creates a National Bureau of Economic Research report that says the age of a business is the biggest factor. Startups, says John C. Hartwanger, a co-author of the study and an economist at the University of Maryland, are where the job creation actually really occurs. Yet it's the small and new businesses that are being choked by government policy. The capital gains rate on investments held more than a year, Lohr wrote, directly impacts angel investors' role in providing seed capital for startups. This is a rate that the administration wants to hike from 15% to 20% on households earning more than $250,000 a year. That's just a single instance of poor public policy. There are more in the 160,000 pages of federal regulation and in the web of state and local rules that squeeze small businesses and startups so tightly that they simply cannot hire. Until this burden is lifted, America's jobs problem isn't going to get any better. Quite an indictment that the United States of America a beacon of liberty and hope and freedom, an example to all the world, has gone from the third most best place to do business, to start a business in the world, now to number 13 in just 5 short years. So we have, and so what does that result in? I would point out to my colleagues is that people like Mr. Langone, who I have watched on television on several occasions, certainly an outspoken individual, to say the least, says that he could not start his business again under the present environment in which they ask. I quote from a Wall Street Journal article, October 15, 2010, entitled "Stop Bashing Business, Mr. President," by Ken Langone. It's entitled, "If we tried to start the Home Depot today, it's a stone-cold certainty that it would never have gotten off the ground." And I quote from this article, "If we tried to start Home Depot today under the kind of onerous regulatory controls that you have advocated," this is, Mr. Langone is talking, writing to the President this, "if we tried to start Home Depot today under the kind of onerous regulatory controls that you have advocated, it's a stone-cold certainty that our business would never get off the ground, much less thrive." It's quite an indictment. He goes on to say rules against providing stock options would have prevented us from incentivizing worthy employees in the startup phase, never mind the incredibly high cost of regulatory compliance overall and mandatory health insurance. Still worse, are there ever rapacious trial lawyers? So he goes on to say, "I stand behind no one in my enthusiasm and dedication to improving our society and especially our health care. It's worth adding that it makes little sense to send secure Treasury checks to high net worth people in the form of Social Security. That includes you, me, and scores of members of Congress. Why not cut through that red tape, apply a basic means test to that program to make sure that money actually reduces federal spending and isn't simply shifted elsewhere?" So it's a very interesting article. He says in it, "A little more than 30 years ago, Bernie Marcus, Arthur Blank, Pat Farah, and I got together and founded the Home Depot. Our dream was to create a new kind of home improvement center catering to do-it-yourselfers. Concept was to have a wide assortment, a high level of service, and lowest pricing spectacular. We opened the lowest pricing possible. We opened the front door in 1979, also a time of severe economic downturn, yet today Home Depot is staffed by more than 325,000 dedicated, well-trained, and highly motivated people offering outstanding service and knowledge to millions of consumers." And then he goes on to say, "If we tried to start Home Depot today under the kind of onerous regulatory controls that you have advocated, it's a stone-cold certainty that our business would never get off the ground, much less thrive." A man by the name of Jim McInerney is the CEO of Boeing Aircraft. He writes what business wants from Washington. And again, I quote from October 31st, 2011. Mr. McInerney says, "America works best when American business and government complement one another. Business plays the vital role in economic expansion and job creation, while government oversees the environment in which businesses can innovate and compete. This approach fueled prosperity for generations and produced the world's largest and most powerful economy. We seem far adrift of that ideal today. The regulatory climate is a perfect example. A tsunami of new rules and regulations from an alphabet soup of federal agencies is paralyzing investment and increasing by tens of billions of dollars the compliance costs for small and large businesses. No one wants to discard truly meaningful public safety or environmental regulations. But what we face is a jobs crisis, and regulators charged with protecting the interests of the people are making worse the problem that's hurting them most. Regulatory relief in the energy sector alone could create up to 2 million new jobs, and we won't have to borrow a penny to pay for it. So he goes on to talk about the super committee, and he says the White House and Congress should build on that momentum and, quote, enact comprehensive pro-growth tax reform that benefits everyone, proceed with regulatory reform, and restructure existing entitlement program. If Washington can once again find the ability to mix democracy and effective governing, American business will once again unleash America's economic potential. So Mr. McInerney, in his article, reflects the views of everybody that I talk to, small businesses and large. They want tax relief. They want regulatory relief. In fact, what they want more than anything else is some kind of certainty about the economic future and the playing field in which they will have to compete. Will there be increasing regulatory burden? Will there be a raise in taxes, as is facing us in 2013? Can we have a tax code that they can understand and comprehend that's fair to one and all? Can they unleash their savings accounts and the money they have kept in reserve and invest and hire with some confidence that there will be a return on that investment, that they will succeed for themselves and their children? That's what this jobs bill is all about. That's what we are trying to get done here. This is an attempt to look at the problems that America faces today, which, by the way, do spill over onto our national security problems, as the former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff pointed out. And so it affects all of America. It hurts us in so many ways. And yet we sit here, apparently the Select Committee, the Super Committee as it's called, is at some kind of gridlock. We sit here today with these one amendment here, one amendment there, back and forth, and then run right out to the media and attack each other for being uncooperative, and why aren't we more congenial, and why aren't we willing to compromise? Well, I will plead guilty for perhaps not being willing to compromise on some issues, because some issues are a matter of principle, and you don't compromise principle, I have found out. But you do come forth with proposals and try to find those that we can agree on. I don't know why we don't agree on a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. Every state, every mayor, every city councilman, every county supervisor, every one of them is faced with the first problem of a balanced budget. Why should we exempt ourselves? Why can't we together work out the details concerning a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution? The overwhelming majority of Americans would heave a sigh of relief if we ever did that, because then they know we'd be more careful stewards of their tax dollars. It seems to me that we could move forward with that. Enhanced rescission authority. I believe that the President of the United States should have enhanced rescission authority, what we used to know of as the old line-item veto, taking those lines in appropriations bills which he objects to and veto them, and I won't go through the complications of how it's done, but have them taken out and with certain restrictions as to how many times he could do it. And then, like every governor, not every governor, but most governors in America have, to line item out without having to veto the entire appropriations bill, sometimes maybe even causing damage to our ability to govern. Now, I am well aware that if we voted an enhanced rescission by the Congress of the United States, signed by the President would probably line item veto some programs that I would object to him doing so. I'm willing, more than willing, to take that pain, as opposed to today, where we continue to have appropriations bills which in many cases people have not read or truly understand. Tax reform, every place I go, people talk to me about the need for tax reform. I have yet to meet an American who understands completely the tax code. I have yet to meet an American that believes that our tax code is fair. I have yet to meet an American that says, if you would just give me 3 tax brackets, a very small number of deductions, and then I could fill out my tax return on a postcard, or in the case of some of the countries, the Baltic countries that used to be under the Soviet Union, on my computer, then you would see greater compliance, you would see less of a need for the IRS, and you would see Americans more than willing to pay their fair share if they believe that the system is fair. And it's not fair when major corporations and individuals pay no taxes because they've got bright lawyers and they take advantage of all the loopholes and deductions that they've been able to get put into the tax code over the years with the help of very powerful lobbyists in this town. Repatriation and territorial reform, the President, the Senator from North Carolina and I have proposed a pretty simple proposal, and that is the $1.4 trillion that's now sitting overseas because they won't bring it back, because of the tax situation, that we could bring them home and we could provide a permanent incentive with that for repatriating these foreign earnings. You know, I say to my friend from North Carolina, I've been kind of astonished at some of the resistance to this where people say it wouldn't do any good. Help me out. It wouldn't do any good to bring $1.4 trillion back to the United States of America? Do we really believe that that would just go in people's wallets and purses? Of course not. Senator from North Carolina, I've talked to many people, these corporation executives, who have said, yes, I'll not only create jobs and invest that money, but I'll give you a plan. I'll give you a plan that we will implement with that money that IBM or Boeing or these major corporations that have this money parked overseas. And they are enthusiastic about it. And yet, unbelievably to me, there are people who argue that it would have no effect whatsoever on our economy. Now, I mean, it's hard to understand. Now obviously we get into Obamacare. I noticed the latest polling showed, I believe, some 54% of the American people want the health care law repealed, and some 30-some% still support it. The fact is that over time, as Americans have learned more and more about this health care law that we passed, they have become more and more opposed to it. And they're angry because the whole purpose of the Health Care Act was to provide all Americans with health care that's affordable, but also to bend the curve of the inflation of health care in America. Because we all know that the present inflation of health care is unsustainable. It's unsustainable. And yet what has been the result? Since the passage, the inflation of health care continues to go up. The cost of health care, whether it be to the men and women who are serving our average citizens, continues to go up, and it has to stop. We need to look at that. We need to look at medical malpractice reform. In Texas today, they passed medical malpractice reform, and it seems to work, and most people are happy with it. The Dodd-Frank bill, you know, it's still stunning to me that we passed this regulatory reform bill, called it financial takeover, that the Dodd-Frank bill is commonly known, that the whole purpose of it was that we would not have legislation, that we would have legislation that would ensure that never again would any institution be too big to fail, because the taxpayers never again should have to bail out any financial institution. Is there anybody that believes that these large, these huge institutions on Wall Street haven't grown bigger? that they're bigger to fail than they used to be? The fact is they are. So what did we get? We got a whole bunch of regulations and a whole bunch of different bureaucracies, some of them less accountable than others, and obviously a damper on some of the financial activities. We need to make sure that no financial institution is too big to fail. We need to make that, assure the American people that never again will they suffer the way that they have during this period of time because of the malfeasance of others. But unfortunately, the Dodd-Frank bill did not achieve that goal. We need to have a moratorium on regulations. Senator Johnson of Wisconsin has a bill that prohibits any federal agency from issuing new regulations until the unemployment rate is equal or less than 7.7%. Senators Snowe and Coburn have introduced legislation that's part of this. Freedom from Restrictive Excess Executive Demands and Onerous Mandates Act. It streamlines and strengthens the Regulatory Flexibility Act by requiring regulators to include, quote, indirect economic impacts in small business analyses, requiring periodic review and sunset existing rules, and expanding business review panels as a requirement for all federal agencies instead of just the Environmental Protection Agency and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. I noticed my friend from Wyoming, Dr. Barrasso, on the floor, who knows more about perhaps the Health Care Reform Act. I will try to be polite today and refer to it as the Health Care Reform Act. I ask unanimous consent to engage in colloquy with the senator from Wyoming.
Without objection. The senator from Wyoming.
Senator Barrasso believed that it could tell perhaps the effects on the cost of health care since the passage of this legislation, and perhaps what we need to do to really fix health care in America, which we all agree needs to be fixed.
And I agree with my colleague from Arizona, and I thank my colleague for his leadership and congratulate and commend him for the piece of legislation that is currently on the floor. And I'm here to speak in support of it because I want to get small businesses hiring again. I want to get people back to work. We need to find ways to make it easier and cheaper for the private sector to create jobs. But this health care law that my colleagues asked me about, it's one of the things the President had promised if you passed it that health insurance rates for families would go down. He said about $2,500 per family per year. And instead we have seen, in response to Senator McCain's question, we have seen health insurance rates go up. And across the board, people agree that they have gone up higher and faster than they would have if the law had never been signed. So I think it was interesting and telling yesterday that the voters of Ohio went to the polls and voted overwhelmingly, almost 2-to-1, to say they don't want to be forced to participate in the President's so-called health care law. The people in Ohio, people in my home state, people in all of the states around the country, what they're asking for, and my goal is to provide people with the care they want from the doctor that they want, the care they need from the doctor they want, at a cost they can afford. And there are things that we need to do, but to put these additional expenses and mandates on the small businesses of this country, the job creators, that just makes it harder and more expensive for those small business owners to hire more people. And at a time in this nation when we have 14 million Americans out of work, over 9% unemployment, we need to take positive steps to help people get back to work. And I view this health care law and the expenses as a heavy wet blanket on the small businesses that are trying to hire people. We know of small businesses around the country that know that the penalties get significant when they hire that 50th employee, and we have businesses that could actually grow who say, no, we're not going to hire that extra person and go beyond that because of the significant expenses to the businesses. They need some certainty, and they're getting so much uncertainty out of Washington with rules and regulations and red tape and the expense of the health care law, the threats that keep coming with increasing threats of increased taxes. that small businesses and businesses are just not hiring. And that's why I'm here to commend and to compliment my colleague from Arizona for bringing forth to the Senate and to the American people a positive proposal to put people back to work.
Senator, on two other issues. One, the issue was not included in the Health Care Reform Act, which is the issue of medical malpractice, which the Senator, Dr. Barrasso, has had a lot of personal experience with. And the other is this, which I think is symptomatic of really the way that we cobbled this whole thing together, that we have now found provision of the bill which cannot be and will not be enforced, and that was the so-called Class Act.
Both of those are areas where there can be significant savings. And the folks that kind of say how much savings, they've said that if they would do the sort of approaches, legislative approaches to remove this lawsuit abuse, that the savings to the federal budget would be about $50 billion over the budgeting time frame. $50 billion. Now, if you talk to any physicians or nurses, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, they would say that the savings would even be greater than that because of all of the additional tests, the so-called defensive medicine that is practiced in an effort to protect hospitals, physicians, healthcare providers from the possibility of a suit. So they do a lot of diagnostic studies, special x-rays, CAT scans, MRIs, blood tests, aimed at trying to not miss something that is very unlikely, but if it's the problem, that then they want to make sure they can protect themselves from a suit. So I think that the savings would be even greater, but even the government accountants who look at this say the savings would be $50 billion. The other is the so-called Class Act. It's something that one of my Democrat colleagues said was comparable to a Ponzi scheme that even Bernie Madoff would be proud of. It was an accounting gimmick, a bookkeeping trick that was used during the passage of the so-called health care law, and it was aimed at trying to bring money in the first 5 years of an accounting scheme where they would then not have to pay for any services and then start paying for services slightly at about the 6th year, and then the expense would go up and up and up. But what they have now realized, what we realized on this side of the aisle initially, right away, pointed out on the Senate floor before the debates and before the votes, that this couldn't work long term. But in an effort to try to use this scheme to say, oh, the health care law was going to pay for itself, they forced this through, crammed it through, just like they did with the rest of the health care law. And now we find out that even the administration says this can't work, it's not going to work. So they say, okay, just repeal that part of the law. Oh, they sure don't want to do that because that would admit that it was a scheme from the beginning. So,
would it also disturb the predictions as far as the fiscal impact of the Class Act as well?
It would. It would undermine the argument of the president who says, well, this is going to pay for itself, when in fact it is not. It is interesting if you just ask people who are watching at home, and you go to town hall meetings and you say, do you think under this health care law that your health care is going to be better or worse? They will tell you that it's going to be worse. Very few people think that their health care is going to be improved under the law that the president has forced through. And then you ask this same group of people, a cross-section of people in any of our states, if they think that actually the cost of their care is going to go down like the president promised or go up. They're all saying, no, it's going to go up. So they're going to have to be paying more, getting less, unhappy with it, which is why I think yesterday in Ohio, 2/3 of the voters who turned out, and the margin was over 1 million voters different between those who were for and against. The voters overwhelmingly voted to say we do not want to have to live under the Obama health care law. We want to be able to opt out of that, which is all the small businesses of this country want. They want to say, we don't want it to apply to us. We don't want to have to deal with these mandates, these expensive mandates. We say, let us work together. Let us work within our state. Let us work with other small businesses. But we don't want to live under these very expensive Washington mandates, which makes it that much harder for us to hire people.
Turn just a minute to medical malpractice reform. because there are many people, when you talk about that, that people believe that there has to be appropriate compensation when malpractice occurs. And we all know that malpractice occurs. And so we don't want to the innocent victims of medical malpractice, however it occurs in the healthcare scenario, to not be able to get just compensation in the case of malpractice on the part of the caregiver.
That's exactly right. I agree 100% with my colleague. The studies have shown, though, that under the system that we live with today, less than a third of the money actually goes to people who ought to be deserving and receiving that money, where the other two-thirds goes to the system, whether it's the lawyers, the courts, the expert witnesses. So very little of the money that is paid in premiums actually gets to the injured party, and there are ways to do a better job of that with significant savings in the process, and making sure that people are appropriately compensated if an injury occurs, but at the same time getting savings out of a system which is overwrought with the money going to the wrong place, and also results in so many unnecessary tests being done in efforts of doctors and nurses and hospitals to protect themselves.
I thank the Senator, and I appreciate his unique expertise in the health care issues that are still transcendent in this country, and I thank him for his enormous contributions. I'd like to continue with some of these legislation. There's the Unfunded Mandates Accountability Act, which is originally an act of Senator Portman's. It requires agencies specifically to address the potential effect of new regulations on job creation and to consider market-based and non-governmental alternatives to regulation, broadens the scope of Unfunded Mandate Reform Act to include rules issued by independent agencies and rules that impose direct or indirect economic costs of $100 million or more, requires agencies to adopt the least burdensome regulatory option that achieves the goal of the statute authorizing the rule, and creates a meaningful right to judicial review of an agency's compliance with the law. If there is anything that's grown out of control in the view of this member, is government regulations. The flood, first it was a trickle, then it's a flood of government regulations, which then impose additional costs, which then take money away from job creation and particularly small business people. And this is, I think, the unfunded mandates, at least accountability of unfunded mandates is called for. Senator Barrasso, and he may want to discuss it, the Government Litigation Savings Act reforms the Equal Access to Justice Act by disallowing the reimbursement of attorney's fees and costs to well-funded special interest groups who repeatedly sue the federal government. The bill retains federal reimbursements for individuals, small businesses, veterans, and others who must fight in court against a wrongful government action. By eliminating taxpayer-funded reimbursement of attorney's fees for wealthy special interest groups, the legislation helps eliminate repeated procedural lawsuits that delay permitting, exploration, and land management. Senator, would you like to comment?
Madam President, I would. Section 8 of this Jobs Through Growth Act is the Government Litigation Savings Act. This is something that was introduced in the House by Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming, our member of Congress. I introduced it in the Senate. And this legislation will return the Equal Access to Justice Act, or what I refer to as EJA, back to its original purpose. Its original purpose. The small business entity or individual citizen should not have their individual liberties overrun by Washington. EJA was meant to provide people with limited financial resources, veterans, Social Security claimants, small business owners, the ability to defend themselves against harmful government actions. And that's how it was intended to be used. It allows individuals to sue the federal government to recover part of their attorney's fees and the costs. But this was a well-intended law, and it has been exploited by large environmental groups with large legal departments, and it's being used now as a profit center for these large organizations through litigation against our government, and they're all getting paid to do it. The total amount has been paid is unknown, and the reason it's unknown is since 1995, something called the Paperwork Reduction Act defunded all the reporting requirements. There's an attorney in Wyoming, Karen Bud Phelan, and she has worked and sought to find out and did research to see how much money a lot of these environmental groups have made. What she found is 14 different environmental groups have brought over 1,200, 14 groups, over 1,200 federal cases in 19 states in the District of Columbia, collected over $37 million in taxpayer dollars through this Equal Access to Justice Act and similar laws. And this doesn't even include settlements and fees that were sealed from public view. This is what we can find in public documents. Lowell Baer, who is the president emeritus of the Boone and Crockett Club, he tracked through the IRS 990 forms and found that of the most litigious so-called nonprofit groups, they're average over $9 million a year of taxpayer money, which, of course, hinders economic growth, limits creation of jobs by individuals and by small businesses and by energy producers, by farmers and ranchers. So I'm very happy to see that my colleague included our efforts in this overall jobs package, because I think that these are the sorts of things that make it that we're trying to overcome that make it harder and more expensive for private sector to create jobs. I want to find ways of making it easier and cheaper for the private sector to create jobs. And just if I could, we've been talking about the private sector. You know, the majority leader has said, oh, the problem wasn't the private sector. He said it was the public sector, the government. Government's doing just fine. It is the private sector that's lost over 1.5 million private sector jobs since February of 2009 through September of 2011.